And for the next 30 days, clean pots and pans from 6 a.m. to midnight, or clean toilets with a toothbrush, or some other horrible, unpleasant learning experience. But all I could hear was my mother wailing. I mean, she just screamed and wailed. And yeah, so that was one of the other things that I never forgot. I just never forgot. They were all former, drug users. They were all people in recovery. There was not a credential in the building.
All right. Hey, everybody. My guest today is a licensed alcohol and drug counselor in Massachusetts and New Hampshire. He's a certified problem gambling specialist. He is someone with lived experience, but not from gambling. We will get into that right now. Please welcome to the Modern Meeting, Ken Feldstein. Ken, welcome.
Thank you, Adam. It's great to be here, man.
And I love your style. I like the glasses on the head look. We look good.
The glasses on the head is because I just I want to be as cool as I possibly can be. And listen, emulating you, I think is a great way to do that.
Listen, I mean, I'm a lot of things, but I am kind of cool, especially when I put the glasses on my head. So you look good. You look good.
Thank you.
So yeah, I mean, I guess before we get into it, tell the Modern Meeting listeners who you are. What did you struggle with, and how did you end up working in the space?
All right, I'm going to make it brief. Famous last words, right? So, as a teenager, back in the Paleozoic era, late 60s, early 70s, I began to struggle with all types of substances. Beginning with alcohol, cannabis, pills, hallucinogens, and ultimately heroin, when there was actually heroin on the streets. I grew up on Long Island in New York. Was a kid, I guess I can describe myself as, and we've heard this phrase many, many times, I was a kid who was uncomfortable in his own skin, always felt a little insecure, never good looking enough, never good enough at sports, just struggled just with my own self-image. And when I used drugs, I felt less inhibited and less uptight, and was able to talk to girls easier when I was high, and that kind of thing. And then, altogether, probably 3 years of addiction to heroin. And I would say that a very short time after I started using to get high, I, of course, was using just to not be sick. And that lasted, for a while. Brushes with the law, a couple of arrests, getting arrested for heroin possession and attempts to sell on Long Island in 1971 was tough, because New York had the famous Rockefeller drug laws. So the penalties were really harsh, and the only thing that I had going for me was the fact that I hadn't been arrested before. So I was given what's called youthful offender treatment. I ended up on probation, and went into treatment in January of 1972, specifically January 28th, 1972, and lived in a therapeutic community, in a residential treatment center, for about 18 months. That was modeled after the Synanon therapeutic community, which was kind of the granddaddy of all TCs, that started out in Santa Monica, California in the late 50s. And people that lived there were the people that ran the program I was in, which was called Logos. So I was at Logos for 18 months. It didn't cost a dime. Back then, programs were well funded by the federal and state governments. And I really, I came out of the program having taken drugs as a method of coping off the table. Had the time to, break down the behaviors that got me into trouble and kind of relearn behaviors that would keep me from relapsing, and carried those tools out the door. And I mean, I'm happy to say it worked for me. It didn't work for everybody. It's kind of the same thing as today. There's no one type of treatment that works for everybody, no magic bullet. People are successful and unsuccessful, in the same, treatment program, or using the same type of treatment approach. So I was lucky.
So you went in
Um,
1972, 18 months later, you're out and you haven't taken a drug since?
that's correct. Yeah, that's correct.
Wow. And so how old were you when you came out of treatment?
I was I was just shy of my 20th birthday. So I went in at 18 and a half, let's say, and came out like a month shy of my 20th birthday. And it's funny, coming out or coming home, coming back to the community, still now as it was then, the most difficult period for a person coming out of treatment, because we all have to kind of go home, or we all have to go back into society and sort of test out the tools that we learned, or we think we learned. And man, listen, I was 19, almost 20. I was still a jerk. I still was immature. I still struggled, um, you know, treating people right and understanding relationships. And I mean, I knew my relationship with drugs was over. I mean, that was clear. That was like the only thing that was clear to me coming out of treatment, was that I wasn't going to use anymore. So, yeah,
So you were using Sorry, go ahead.
oh, go ahead. That's all right.
So you were using heroin like 14, 15, 16, 17.
Yeah, I would say 15, 16, 17, and just shy of, and really, and 18. Yeah. Um,
Wow.
so I
And
graduated.
what got you into the treatment center? Was it did someone find out and forced you to go? Like, how did you end up there?
Great question. So I have a dear cousin who's several years older than me, Neil. He actually lived at Synanon for 3.5 years in the late 60s.
Mm.
And I remember Neil as a kid. I mean, he really gave his parents a run for his money, and just got into a lot of trouble, was sent to military school to kind of straighten him out, that type of thing. But he ended up moving into Synanon, and my father reached out to him when they were all struggling with me, because I had gotten arrested, oh, like a month after I graduated high school, or 2 months after I graduated high school in 1971. And, everybody was finding out for the first time, uh-oh, Kenny's got a problem. He just got arrested for selling heroin to a undercover police officer. Not a good look for me.
Mm.
So he called Neil. Neil reached out to me, and I spent probably a weekend at Neil's house in New Jersey. He and his wife had met in Synanon, and he talked to me for 2, 3 days, and he connected with somebody that he had known from Synanon, who was the executive director of this program, Logos, that was in the Bronx. And that's how I got connected
Wow.
to
So
the
now
program.
you mentioned, you're 20 years old, you're a jerk. I mean, I talk all the time on the modern meeting where it's like I have so much what's the word? Like these young people that can come in and stop at such a young age, I find so admirable because when I think of me, like I mean, I wasn't even close to being ready, right? We know it took me 20 years. Talk about being 19 years old, 20 years old, and what were some of the things that, that stuck with you while you were in treatment? And I mean, this is such an interesting story because we have, I'm doing the math, if you graduate high school in 71, we have 50 years of recovery to dive into, which is amazing. But start with when you were in treatment, what were some of the things that gave you those light bulb moments that made you realize that, like you mentioned, you can't do drugs anymore?
Great question, and easy for me to answer. Two things pop into my head, Adam. So, number one was, so the night I got arrested the first time, my dad came to pick me up at the police station. Because I had, he paid bail. I got bailed out. And, I was in handcuffs. And my dad seeing me in handcuffs, I remember it being a moment of humiliation and shame that you can go two ways with shame. People very often will use drugs because of the pain and the humiliation of shame. And in my case, I just never wanted to feel that way again, ever. And it was such a powerful motivator, and so unusual to have shame actually work in your favor in recovery. So that was one. And number two was the night I got arrested for an attempted heroin sale. The cops that intercepted me on my way to making a sale, I got set up by the person that was buying the drugs from me. She had a boyfriend that was, in jail, and I was the I was the chip. I was, she I arranged to sell her 20 bags of heroin. The payback for me being arrested was her boyfriend got cut loose, and I only know that because at the arraignment the next day she was there, and she left with the boyfriend as I was waiting to be arraigned. But so the night that I got arrested, I'm in the back of the unmarked police car. There's three cops, and two of the cops they bring me home in their car, and they ring my doorbell. I can't see anything, but they ring the doorbell of my house, and my mother was there, and my older sister was there. And my mother had breast cancer at the time. And all I remember was I could hear the footsteps walking up the walk to the door. I hear the doorbell ring. I'm probably 60, 70 feet away, but all I could hear was my mother wailing. I mean, she just screamed and wailed. And yeah, so that was one of the other things that I never forgot. I just never forgot. And so it was just the shame of that was brought on myself and the family, and I just never wanted to go back there again.
So you essentially entered recovery, you were ready. You because of those two moments, because I was thinking as far as like light bulb moments, you were going to tell me something you learned in recovery, but essentially you went into recovery like completing step one, realizing that you had you just didn't want to do it anymore.
Well, so I got arrested in September. I didn't go into treatment. I didn't like make the move to go into treatment until January. So it was, I don't know how many months, 4 or 5 months later. So in the interim, I'm on probation. I go see the probation officer probably sometime in September, early October for the first time. And he takes a urine sample, and maybe a week later, I get called to come back in, and I sit down, and he puts a piece of paper down on his desk, and he goes, "You're in violation of probation," because my urine came back, with, positive for opioids. And he said to me, "The only reason you're not going to jail tonight is because your mother's sick." That's what he said. So that was, say, September, October. So still, you know, not enough for me to kind of do anything about it. I was going to probation support groups and stuff like that. I continued to see the probation officer. I had a part time job at a department store. I was getting high with my boss during all this. I mean, I was not,
Well, so yeah,
yeah,
so that's what I'm saying. You said that you had those moments, but then you kept using.
I kept using, but when I was able to gain some clarity and some continuous sobriety when I was in treatment,
Right.
those were the things that I landed on.
Okay. And
Yeah.
so what were some of the obviously, just from what I hear, like the physical, the withdrawals, like that's like the toughest part of coming off of opioids. Um, what was that like? And then what was the treatment like for you? Was there group stuff? Was there, did you, was it like what was your medicine in there?
Um, yeah. So the treatment, so the detox happened. I went through it 2 or 3 times, just 10 days of writhing on a bed. So by the time I got to Logos that day, um, there was nothing left in my system, but there was I didn't go through a medically supervised detox. I just sort of sweated it out, over the course of
Mhm.
7 or 10 days. It was like the third time I had done it. And then when I was in the program, very regimented. It was, described as a paramilitary environment. The first 5 days. So the day I got to Logos, the first day, in the lobby, there's a front desk, and one of the residents is, in charge of the front desk, and then there's a wooden chair next to the front desk, and it was called the prospects chair. So anybody that was thinking about going into treatment would sit on the prospect chair, and they would have you there just thinking about this decision that you were about to make. And the front door, I mean, I could have at any point bolted and just ran out the front door, and because it was all voluntary, I wasn't sent there by the court or anything like that. So this was in the South Bronx, the program. So I was maybe one of five, white people in the program, and out of 115 people, and everyone else was African American, Puerto Rican, pretty much that combination. So I was very much in the minority, but in the town that I grew up in on Long Island, it was a very mixed community. So I had, I grew up the best possible way, with black and white, playing ball together, friends together. We never really saw color back then. So, but at the same time, here I am, a kid from the suburbs, sitting in the South Bronx, and it was intimidating. But I stuck it out. The first 5 days I was in Logos, I was in the Bronx, and then they sent me up to the main treatment facility in Liberty, New York, where I spent the next year, and then eventually came back down to that same Bronx facility for the last 6 months that I was there. And then the treatment consisted of 3 or 4 times a week, 3 or 4 nights a week. They had encounter groups, group therapy, and modeled after the Synanon game, which is very confrontational. Um, there's usually one or two facilitators, maybe 10, 12 people sitting in a circle, and the rules were, no violence, no threat of physical violence, but other than that, anything goes. So if I stepped on somebody's toe, and if we were out in the street, they would have clocked me. Instead, they had to learn how to just yell at me in a circle and get their feelings, out of their systems. And it was a whole process of breaking down that street image, that sort of butch kid, image, and get to what was going on emotionally inside of you.
And so once you're out, what is 'cause I mean, your life hasn't even started yet. I mean, you're 20 years old, and so what were those years following? You know, did you ever have any urges, and, like, what was your relationship with alcohol? Like, did you cut out everything from when
Yes.
you were 20? Okay.
Yeah, so it was like, it was complete abstinence from any mind-altering chemicals or substances.
Mm,
Never missed anything. I really never missed any of it. Um, so when I left the program, in July of '73, um, my my mom died while I was in treatment. She passed away. Probably I was 4 months into treatment when she passed away. So the house I grew up in got sold. So the old going home was not an option. And my dad had remarried before my mom passed away. They had gotten divorced after being married like 33 years, I want to say. And he and my stepmother um, moved down to Florida, to Ocala, Florida, built a house, and built a room for me, which I ultimately decided would be a step backwards for me to move back into the comfort of a home, sort of a nest. I felt that I needed to continue to challenge myself and continue the painful process of growing up and making my own way, getting a job, getting an apartment. So I used that room when I went to visit them, but I didn't move down to Florida with them. I stayed in the New York area and continued to just do the best I could and fend for myself and buy my own clothes and buy my own food and buy my own car, and all those things were firsts for me.
mm.
But I really felt that they went a long way towards you know giving me the giving me the chops to kind of live on my own and then kind of figure it out myself as I went.
So what did recovery look like for you for those years? Did you go to
It
meetings or
didn't I didn't go to meetings. There was no aftercare. So I came out in '72, and I want to say, so I had a couple of jobs. I went to college in I think I started in '74, and I had a full-time job, and I was going to school full-time at CW Post College out in Greenville, Long Island. And I had a job at St. Mary of the Angels Home for Boys, and I was a group home aide for kids that were from tough circumstances. They called them PINs, persons in need of supervision. So I would do that. And then to give you an idea of just how far from my world drugs were, I actually got a job as an order picker for a pharmaceutical wholesaler in Queens. So what would happen was, drugstores would place orders for anything from, Pampers to Percocet. Um, and those orders would come past me. I'd be checking off to make sure that the bottle of 500, Darvon or whatever they were, had the right strength and was the right amount. And I would check it off on a sheet and it would roll down the assembly line. I mean, it might as well have been popcorn or Tootsie Rolls. I mean, it was the concept of drugs or relapsing was so far from my scope that it had no impact whatsoever.
so this is going to be an unpopular question or maybe inappropriate question, but I have to ask because my brain is I can't I'm having trouble processing this. To me, it sounds like you may not have had quote unquote the disease. You just had a really rough stretch. Cause how do you explain abstaining from drugs and alcohol for all these years without doing any recovery, without going to meetings or doing anything?
Because, Adam, I had 18 months of daily meetings, if you will, or daily therapy, if you will, without any distractions, you know, no contact with anybody other than the brothers and sisters in the program who are all on recovery journeys, themselves. And I had the time. I had the time to really unpack what was going on with me, right? See the sides of me that really needed attention and needed to change. And it was a community. I recovered in a community of people who were trying to just survive and not have to use drugs anymore because of all the negative consequences that it had gotten us involved in. So for me, the negative consequences, arrest and criminal record and the addiction piece and having to go through the family anguish and all that. And I was in the program with people who were stick up men and hijackers and all different kinds of stories, but we were all connected by the fact that we all turned to drugs to address the pain and discomfort that we had inside in our hearts, in our guts. And when you compare treatment today, so the standard of treatment today for somebody going into long-term treatment generally is 30 or 35 days. So I did 30 days 18 times back to back.
Well, that's my next question is, if this is something that worked for you and worked for a lot of other people, where did it go? Why isn't this a thing anymore?
I love that question. And what's going to be awesome is that this fall, NPR is doing a story. I think it's a 3-part story on what happened to the therapeutic community, because listen, it worked for a lot of people back when I was a resident there. Again, a lot of people it didn't work for, right? But they in the 80s, I would say, probably by the late 70s, early 80s, they began to disappear. So the people that ran these programs and I was part of one of those programs, they were all former, drug users. They were all people in recovery. There was not a credential in the building for the entire time that I was there. Not a credential. It was just people who had either been at Synanon or for whatever reason they stopped using, and they had that lived experience to share and an incredible amount of compassion and understanding for other people who were trying to do that too.
But you understand where I'm coming from, where it's like anything that I've ever read or anyone that I've ever talked to in any of the fellowships, it's a lifelong thing, right? Like we live with this the rest of our lives. So the idea that if you have 18 months of hard, solid recovery, that you can just re-enter the world and you're good to go. I've never heard of that before. Like, you're the
Yeah,
first person I've ever heard, you know,
yeah,
which is why I would, and once again, I'm not like, I'm not downplaying your recovery, or I'm not, but there's a part of me that thinks like you don't, maybe you don't have it, because I don't know. I've just never, I'm just, I've, I've never heard of this. It's just
yeah,
crazy.
yeah. So in the 80s, insurance companies got involved, requirements became, there has to be at least a social worker, in the house, or at least
Right.
somebody with some credentials, because, the academics, you know, there's no academics. How could you possibly be successful treating someone for a chronically relapsing, medical condition, and you have no medical people on staff? So I would argue vehemently that it was a bullshit excuse for dismantling the therapeutic community.
Mm.
Listen, if I broke the rule in the TC and I used drugs, or I got into a fight with somebody, they would say to me, Kenny, you have a choice here. You can either leave, get the fuck out, pardon my French. And I was up in Liberty, New York in the wintertime when it was like 9 feet of snow on the ground, and they would basically, kick you out, or agree to have my head shaved and agree to wear a sign that said, I'm an idiot, please help me. And for the next 30 days, clean pots and pans from 6 a.m. to midnight, or clean toilets with a toothbrush, or some other horrible, unpleasant learning experience. I
Mm,
could either agree to that, or I could hit the road.
yeah.
And and when people are faced with, that kind of a choice, some people hit the road and disappeared into the snow.
Mm,
And and some people didn't, because they wanted so bad to get better and not go back to the life that they came from, that they said, shave my head. Yeah, I'll wear a sign. I'll work for 30 days in the pot pen and learn from it, hopefully.
mm.
And many of us did. Many of us did.
And and so how did you end up working in the space or getting your certifications?
So that came later. I eventually got hired to be a counselor with no credentials for an outpatient drug and alcohol counseling program in the Bronx. And I was there for 6.5 years. It was funded by the state of New York. I eventually became the director there, probably 3 years in, and and loved the work that I did. I loved the work that I did. We were teaching people skills. We had a carpentry workshop. We had a photography workshop. We had a GED teacher on the premises. We had an office skills training program. And so people would come in off the streets and with no skills and no education, and they'd be given the opportunity to learn skills and get jobs and that type of thing. But back then, and so we're talking in the mid 70s, say 75 to 79 ish. I was making a whopping, $15,000 a year, and to
Mm,
live and pay rent in New York on 15 grand at the time had become just impossible. So I had a good friend who had started a clothing company with a cousin, and I went from drug and alcohol counseling to apparel manufacturing. And I stayed in the apparel world, the business world, for 35 years after leaving that Bronx program. And I had to retire actually twice, and be sitting at home with nothing to do in retirement. I'm like, what do I want to do with the rest of my life? Still, I mean, I was bored out of my mind, and I went to Learn to Cope meetings. I don't know if you've heard of Learn to Cope. It's a volunteer organization that helps families struggling with loved ones who are dealing with addiction. A place that my wife at the time and I had gone about my son Brendan, because we were at our wits' end in terms of what to do about him. And I started going back to these Learn to Cope meetings, and I was telling my story and giving people messages of hope. And I really loved doing that. And that led to going to recovery coach training, Recovery Coach Academy. And I got hired by High Point in Brockton as a recovery coach, and was doing recovery coaching. And I was there for 5 years doing Suboxone treatment. It was a Suboxone clinic, and went back to school while I was working to get my LADAC. And went through the LADAC program at UMass Boston, took the test, and then got licensed. And I had the license renewed a few times since I did that. And I have my own counseling practice for the past year and a half, out of East Bridgewater. now. So I've got about 20 clients that I work with, and primarily substance use disorder counseling.
Amazing. Now, you mentioned your son. I don't know if you want to get into it. If not, we can cut this. But what was it like for you as someone who experienced that? And then you obviously must have had, you were looking for it. You knew that it was, most likely hereditary. And then take us through the progression of, what happened with your son, and what did you do about it as a parent, or what could you do?
Yeah, great question. And you would think that, yes, I would spot it right away. I was the last one to know. It
Mm,
took it took the father of a good friend of Brendan's to call me one day and say, "Hey, Kenny, you may not. I don't know if you know this, but Brendan's really struggling with a terrible drug problem." Because his son had come to him and said, I don't know what to do. Brendan's just off the wall." And yeah, I went to see this father and we talked, and I was shell shocked. I came out, I came home, and Brendan was living at home, and yeah, I mean, I turned his arms over, and he had tracks up and down his arms, and I'm like, where, how asleep at the wheel could I have possibly been? Um,
mm,
yeah. So what happened then was a whole series of, okay, what do we do? He was in and out of treatment many, many times, these 30-day programs and detoxes, and sectioned them, Section 35, and, forced treatment and all that. And here's an ironic story. So my first wife had breast cancer, and she dealt with the cancer for 17 years. At first, very, oh yeah, 98% of the people that have this type of cancer recover. So we didn't know at that time, but she was going to be one of the 2% that was going to be overcome by it. So Brendan was actually, so he was still using. He was in treatment at one point. This is going back to 2012, probably the spring, summer of 2012. He was in treatment in Weymouth, at Spectrum, I think. Barbara, my wife, his mother's condition was worsening and worsening and worsening. The pace of the cancer really began to escalate. It spread, and he wanted to come home and help with her care. And I remember, being against it because I wanted him so badly to just have the chance to get better and get what he needed. He insisted. I relented. He came home, and for the last 2 weeks of her life, carried her up and down the stairs and was very involved in taking care of her. And he tells this story that's amazing. Like, he opened the refrigerator one night, and her medications are in there, and pain killing medications. And he says, I reached for something and I just stopped in this moment of amazing clarity. And he says, and he has said this, in on panel discussions, that he said, no, man, this family has just been through enough, and I'm done. I'm done. And so um, he made that decision. Barbara passed away. His mom died 2 weeks, a couple of weeks later. And he waited around for a bed at a program in Brighton, and went to residential treatment for about 6 months. And it was AA oriented. He was very connected to the AA community. He finished the program, moved into an apartment with two other guys that he was in recovery with. And so he went that more, recent, traditional route, and it
and
worked
he's
for him.
doing good to this day. He's
He's
clean to
doing
this
good.
day.
He's 13 years and change. Yeah, yeah.
Amazing.
Living down in outside of Austin, Texas. Yeah.
Amazing. And one follow-up question to that is, like, when he was younger, did you ever have the conversation with him and tell him about your history, or no?
I did. I did. It's a vague recollection, but he was getting into some trouble And I mean, he was a great athlete. Played football, played lacrosse, played baseball. And I remember him getting into some kind of a jackpot where he with another kid like were stealing scientific calculators in high school, like stealing them and selling them.
Mm,
And of course, he got in trouble for it, and he was using the money to to get high with.
mm,
And it was at one of those points where I spoke to him about my experience and what I had gone through, and it's vague to me now, but someday you'll have him on the podcast, and you can ask him these questions and see if it lines up. But I'm not sure how much my influence, probably very little, had on him in terms of stopping, because he went to Bentley University as a walk on the football team, and his drinking and his drugging escalated quickly when he was in college. Yeah, yeah.
So, being a recovery coach and working in the space and helping all the people that you help, what was it like for you as someone who had your experience, which was very different, right? 18 months of hard recovery and then essentially, you lived your life. How have you adapted to the present day where there are restrictions where someone can't just go for 18 months like you did? How have you adjusted your approach and how do you work with people in recovery?
Love that question. So one of the first things I try to do is if somebody the so if there's such a thing as an ideal client for me, so somebody that goes, to treatment, right? Comes out after a month, 35 days. Sometimes they're lucky enough to get 60 or 90 days. It's rare though. Um, it's usually, 5 to 7 days of detox, maybe some clinical stabilization. Maybe they have 19 to 21 days, and sometimes it's a little bit longer. So that person now is coming home, right? Coming back to their community. And one of the first things I try to do is help them connect to an ongoing recovery community, whether it's AA or NA or smart recovery or refuge recovery or whatever it is. I'm a big believer in the peer recovery centers, which are, they're around the South Shore, and they're all around Massachusetts, but they're these just wonderful places where there's sober social activities and meetings and groups, usually 6 days a week, sometimes 7 days a week. And I try to get people to connect with a recovery community so that they can make, new friends and keep the sobriety momentum, going. And all those services are free. And one of the great things about being, having lived experience, having been a recovery coach, and now being a clinical counselor, and I'm on my own, I don't have a boss, I can do whatever the hell I want in terms of whatever the needful is for that individual, I do it. So I've brought people to peer recovery centers on my own time just to introduce them, break the ice, have them sit in a group, get them feel the vibe, and hopefully they connect and they want to go back on their own. And I'm doing that this Saturday. I'm bringing somebody to a peer recovery center this Saturday just because, you know, got no friends, got no social life, bored, feeling stagnant, sober, but struggling because there's nothing to stimulate the juices of recovery. So I try to get people to get sloppy with their recovery juices and find things. I help them find things that will help them stay connected because I'm a big believer in community recovery. I mean, I
Mm,
love the modern meeting on Monday nights because it's a community.
yeah,
And the healing power of a community, I would argue, is as strong as anything that's out there.
amen. And you're obviously you know you m- you told me at the top that you also have gambling recovery specialist. Talk about how did you end up going for that? And, you know, obviously we've talked about the similarities and the differences at length on this podcast, but I want to hear your perspective. How do you see gambling versus, the other substances?
So I actually fell into the gambling thing. I want to say 2 years ago. Some colleagues of mine that I see all the time on trainings with Boston Medical Center's, Graken Center for Addiction and Recovery, and they do trainings all the time. And I go to trainings all the time to try to keep my stuff sharp and learn more about what's out there and what's happening. And I noticed that some of them were going to this, it was like a statewide day-long problem gambling conference that the state of Massachusetts was sponsoring. So I just said, well, why not? Let me just go and see what I can learn. And I was blown away. I mean, I knew nothing about problem gambling. I knew nothing about gambling addiction. And the workshops that I got to attend and the people that I got to hear speak and the people who I had conversations with, and they were from all over the country, not only just in Massachusetts. And, I began to understand a little bit about this concept of sort of behavioral addiction, gambling and, sex and shopping and gaming. And I became fascinated with it. So I jumped into it. I took all the trainings necessary and I got certified. So, yeah, I'm still waiting, honestly, for my first gambling client. I don't have any gambling clients right now,
Mm,
but I do a gambling screening with everybody that I meet for the first time and try to, create an awareness and give them some education around what can happen if gambling forces its way into the picture, which often it will,
for sure. So, last question. When you initially came to the Modern Meeting, I'm sure you don't mind me saying that when you introduced yourself, you said that you were struggling with overeating. So, if you don't mind, talk about that a little bit, and just as far as what has the journey been like there? And once again, I think there's some real similarities with gambling, with
yeah,
overeatings. So
yeah.
talk about that a little bit.
Thanks for bringing it up, because that's been so we talk a lot about transfer addictions, right? So people that struggle with drugs can very easily begin to struggle in other areas with gambling, with food. So with food and me, I mean, I've always had food noise in my head. So food for me has always tickled the same sort of pleasure areas in the brain that drugs did, or that anything pleasurable does. So I've probably gained and lost hundreds, if not thousands of pounds since I was, say, 30 years old. So when I was 30 years old and I was eating like I was 14 years old, all of a sudden, I was like, 60 pounds heavier, and then 80 pounds heavier, and then 100 pounds heavier. And then what happens when you realize just how much damage obesity does to your health, your relationships, your self-image, the self-loathing. It was so familiar, to be somebody that was unhappy with myself and insecure, all over again. All these old triggers, were coming back, and I would just eat to feel better. I would eat when I was depressed. I would eat when I was happy. I would eat when I would just eat. That's what I did. And I'd wake up in the morning and my eyes would open up, and it's like, well, okay, what am I going to eat? Not only today, but, oh yeah, on Friday, you know, such and such a thing is happening. I wonder what kind of food they're going to have there. And it all became about the food. It was like an obsession with the food. And yeah, so that just, I've lost 100 pounds. I've gained 100 pounds. Over and over and over again. So last year, I want to say, I wound up, I opened my eyes, I was 355 pounds. And I'm 260 now, which still feels, it sounds like a lot, but for me, 260, man, is svelte, Jack. 260 is like Brad Pitt for me. I still have, a 30 pounds or so that I want to lose, going forward. But I was, I have a weight management doctor. I've been taking the GLP-1 medication since March. So, that weight loss, 60 pounds probably on the medication, and then maybe 30 pounds or 35 pounds that I lost just with diet and exercise. But the main thing that the medication does for me is it takes the food noise out of my head. I mean, there are so many, I hate most food now. There's only certain foods I'll eat, but it's so strange for me to push food away and be full. I mean, me be full? No, I would always just eat my portion and any portion that was nearby. And that's all changed, and the self-loathing is gone. My blood work is pristine. I've got the internal machinations of a 25-year-old again, who's not, who's eating right and all that. So yeah, just it was a real easy trap for me to fall into. And people say, well, you got to eat, you got to eat. Yeah, you got to eat, but you don't have to eat, tonnage.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I need to have you come back for another episode because I have 1,000 questions about this. Because obviously, I struggle. I've struggled my whole life. I mean, I guess a couple follow-up questions, just in your experience. What about people who? So, like, when you got up to 355, what were the things that led to that? Was it fast food? Was it when you ate? Was it the amount that you ate?
It was all of the above. So at my worst, Adam, I'm, not happy to say, but I'd finish work. I'd be driving home to have dinner, with my wife, because I've since remarried. And on my way home to have dinner, I would stop at McDonald's and buy a Big Mac and French fries, or, four, Dunkin' Donuts or something like that. I, I get it. So it was all about the getting. And this is where it's very similar to gambling. I think it wasn't
Mm.
so much about tasting the food, or the pleasure of eating the food. It was the getting of the food. I get it. There it was, the Big Mac. I'm sitting in my car in the parking lot, and I'm eating that bad boy. And I swear to you, I don't taste it. I'm just making I don't even taste it. I'm making it disappear, and I want to eat it quickly. And then I crumple up, the bag or whatever, and I stuff it under my, car seat, hiding it, right?
And then you get to smell mac sauce for the next few days.
Smell Max sauce, go home, and then eat dinner, after eating the Big
Right,
Mac.
right.
That's how bad it had gotten. But it was all the behaviors were identical to the behaviors of somebody in active addiction.
I mean, I'm sure you could tell by my face, like, I've definitely done that, for sure. Like, definitely done that. And, I think that I talked about it way back in the beginning of the podcast where there would be moments early in recovery where I would be driving into a McDonald's drive-through with the same feeling I had driving into the casino, where it's like, I don't want to do this, but I still did it. So it's definitely it's definitely something I continue to struggle with. But we got to have you back on because we got to dive into this. We probably should have dove into it more.
No, I'd
Um,
be I'd be happy to, because food addiction is something that it's real. It's very real, and it
Actually,
falls
I got
right.
to no. You know what? I got to ask you. I got to ask you a couple more questions. We'll figure out the edit. So for me, right, as someone who worked in the restaurant industry for 20 years, and I would consider myself like I'm not like a foodie, but like when I go out to eat, I I appreciate a good meal. And that this isn't just an excuse for a heavy person. You know what I mean? Like I really do like good food, and I appreciate what a chef puts into a recipe, and but how does someone like that, like, because I don't want to just eat grilled chicken and rice and vegetables the rest of my life, right? Like I want to be able to go out and enjoy good dinners. I want to be able to have potatoes and pasta once in a while. So I mean, is that possible in your opinion, for someone who is heavy? Is it all about what I know it's about, which is just kind of like moderation, and you got to sprinkle in exercise? Like what have you learned over your struggles?
Well, so the first thing I learned is that life is 80-20. If you eat the food that's good for you 80% of the time, and 20% of the time, you're eating stuff that maybe, isn't on, that diet,
Mm,
you're good. You're going to be ahead of the game. I have a son-in-law who is a bodybuilder, you know, personal trainer, nutrition coach, and this boy wakes himself up at 10:30 at night if he falls asleep to eat his last meal of the day of the right, macros and all that.
mm.
I mean, he's 180 pounds of chiseled muscle. It's unbelievable if you see his body. And one day on a weekend, this he will eat half of Florida. You know, bagels, sandwiches, pancakes. Friday night he makes his own pizzas, that type of thing. And
Mm.
and he does it, and he does it because it wakes up his body's metabolism when he has that cheat meal or series of cheat meals. And when it's done in the right balance with some science behind it, you can eat all that rich food, enough of it, to satisfy you, and then you'll really learn, like I was able to learn how to love chicken. And I'm not supposed to eat rice because it's carbohydrates, but I love broccoli, man. I love chicken. I love salmon. I never ate that shit before. But
Right.
now I love it, and I've learned how to prepare it and how to season it, and I salivate for that.
Yeah.
And when I think of pizza, I'm afraid of pizza, so I have to really be, pushed to have a slice of pizza, or because
See,
I would buy pizza, I'd eat all 8 slices.
yeah, but see that you had me until those last couple sentences. That sounds miserable to never eat pizza again. But
No, no, no,
the idea
it's
that
not
I can
never. It's not never. You can, but you
2
just
out of 10 times.
not
Right.
not not 8 slices at a time.
Right. And like I can live with having a I can live with eating boring and healthy 8 out of 10 times. I think I can do that. But yeah, those 20%. So what about, like, is it, sadly, fast food is just like you can't do it, right? Ever.
Well, it's just that it's poisonous for you, just
Yeah.
the way that it's made. And it's made, America obese, and it's just
Yeah.
the quality of the ingredients and all that. But you'll get exposed to, what good food really is. And then when you make the adjustment mentally, because it's a big
Mm,
mental adjustment, it wasn't hard for me to embrace healthy food when in the past the word healthy food was like, ugh, what
right.
is that? Like anything in that category of healthy food is just horrible to think about, but it's actually become something that I crave. I crave certain healthy
No,
foods. Yeah.
and as you're saying it just now, you just got my brain to go back to about a year ago around this time when the podcast started. I was in the midst of I had some bad blood work in September that scared me into eating healthy and exercising. September, October, November into December of 2024, I dropped 35 pounds. And yeah, like the thought of fast food, I was like, I'm never eating fast food again. I'm never doing this. And then the holidays came, and then it's just been a slow, yeah, I gained it all back in 8, 9, 10 months, and it's just like similar to gambling. I find myself getting in like these fogs, right? Where it's like you're just sitting at the machine. I'm just kind of sitting on the couch eating, not even thinking about it. You know what I mean? So yeah, it's there's definitely some similarities for
Yeah.
sure.
And the concept of mindfulness. So I do a lot of work on mindfulness. I meditate every Thursday from 8 to 8:30 with a meditation group. I've joined a mindfulness training series of seminars that are going to happen later this month and into December. And then next year, I'm signing up for an 8 week, mindfulness training course where it's 2.5 hours a week for 8 weeks, culminating in a weekend silent retreat, the thought of which makes me like, are you kidding? Are you
Yeah.
kidding? Because being alone with my thoughts has always been a shit show. Racing thoughts and yeah, I can't slow anything down. And but
Yeah.
I'm working on it. I'm working on it, and it's so uncomfortable for me. But I know that it's the key about thinking about you get a thought in your head, the thought connects itself to a feeling, and then you have the choice of acting off that feeling or putting some time and some distance and a pause between the feeling and the action. And there is some legitimate science to that pause. And it's come up in the modern meeting group before
Yeah.
about if we can learn to pause and think about consequences,
Mhm.
we can spin our way out of an urge or a craving. We
And you
can.
know what I love and you know what I love about everything you just said too? It's the fact that and no offense, but the fact that you're doing this work at your age, it just speaks a lot to you because I feel like once people get to a certain age, they're just like, eh,
Yeah.
I lived my life. Like I'm not changing. You know what I mean? The fact that you have this desire to continue to better yourself, it's amazing. It's inspiring. And I hope people listening out there that, you know, that they realize that it's there's no such thing as like, you know, I'm too old now, or I'm this, I'm that. You know? I love
Yeah.
it.
I bellyache all the time about why did it take me my whole life to get to this space, this mental
Mm,
space. I love what I do for work. I love it.
yeah.
Um, and I love this focus on health. So I'm 72. Yeah, how many years do I have left? Maybe 10 good ones, until I fall apart completely and this container that I'm stuck in finally, shits the bed and that's it, probably literally and figuratively. So I feel like I'm in the home stretch. I feel like I'm in the clubhouse turn and I want to finish right.
Yeah, you're
Yeah.
gonna finish strong. And
Finish strong.
you got at least 20, 30 years. Come on.
All right.
10 years? Yeah. But Ken, thank you so much. This was great.
My pleasure,
I was
man.
looking forward to this. And definitely, yeah, we definitely I know I say it to everybody, like I gotta have you back on. I really need to have you back on because we really gotta dive into this overeating stuff for sure.
We will. We will. I love talking about it, and
Yeah.
I love tonight. Thank you so much for taking the time, and yeah, it's been great. Thank you, and
Awesome.
I'll see you in an hour or so.
Absolutely. All right. Thanks, Ken.
All right. Thank you, man. Bye.
All right. We will be right back.